They say that innovation is the lifeblood of progress, but what they don't tell you is that the most dangerous threat to innovation comes from those who steal it from the inside. My name is Dr. Samuel Chun, and this is the story of how I discovered that my trusted research partner was systematically stealing my life's work to build his own pharmaceutical empire, and how I used his own greed and scientific ignorance to orchestrate the most devastating corporate revenge in biotech history. I'm 45 years old, and until 14 months ago, I was living what most scientists would consider the pinnacle of a research career. I was the chief scientific officer and co-founder of Biogenesis Therapeutics, a cutting-edge pharmaceutical company specializing in gene therapy treatments for rare diseases. Our company had developed revolutionary treatments that were saving lives and generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for patients who had previously had no hope for effective treatment. My research partner and business co-founder, Dr. Marcus Webb, and I had built Biogenesis from a small university lab into one of the most promising biotech companies in the world over the course of 8 years. We'd started with a shared vision of using advanced genetic engineering to create treatments for diseases that traditional pharmaceuticals couldn't address effectively. Marcus handled the business development, regulatory affairs, and investor relations, while I focused on the scientific research, drug development, and clinical trial design. Our partnership had been incredibly successful from the beginning. Marcus was a brilliant businessman with an MBA from Wharton and connections throughout the pharmaceutical industry that allowed us to secure funding, navigate regulatory approval processes, and establish partnerships with major medical institutions. I was the scientific genius behind our breakthrough treatments. I had developed proprietary gene therapy techniques and drug delivery systems that could target specific genetic mutations and correct them at the cellular level. My background in molecular biology, biochemistry, and genetic engineering allowed me to create treatments that were years ahead of what most pharmaceutical companies were developing. Together, we'd built Biogenesis into a company that was revolutionizing treatment for rare genetic diseases. We'd successfully brought 3 major treatments to market, with several more in various stages of clinical trials. Our treatments were not only saving lives, but also generating significant revenue that allowed us to fund even more ambitious research projects. But what I didn't realize was that Marcus had been systematically stealing my research and using it to build his own competing pharmaceutical company, planning to destroy Biogenesis and claim credit for all of my scientific innovations. The first sign that something was wrong came during our quarterly board meetings with our investors and advisory board members. Marcus had always been the primary spokesperson for our company's scientific achievements, but I'd started noticing that he was presenting research findings and development timelines that didn't match what we were actually achieving in our laboratories. Initially, I assumed these were simple miscommunications or differences in how we were interpreting our research data. But as I began paying closer attention to Marcus's presentations and our company's public statements, I realized that the discrepancies were too significant and too consistent to be accidental errors. More troubling was Marcus's behavior during our internal research meetings. He'd always been interested in the scientific details of our work, but lately he seemed to be asking unusually specific questions about our proprietary techniques, our unpublished research data, and our future development plans. He would request copies of research protocols, laboratory notes, and experimental data that he'd never needed for his business responsibilities. The breakthrough came when I discovered evidence of the most sophisticated intellectual property theft I'd ever encountered. Marcus had been secretly copying our research data, stealing our proprietary techniques, and sharing our unpublished scientific discoveries with a competing pharmaceutical company that he was planning to launch. He'd been using his access to our laboratories, our research protocols, and our clinical trial data to build a comprehensive database of our innovations that he could use to replicate our treatments. But the theft was even more elaborate than simple corporate espionage. Marcus had been systematically undermining our patent applications and our regulatory submissions to delay our ability to bring new treatments to market. He'd been sharing confidential information about our research timeline and our development strategies with competitors who were using that information to develop competing treatments. Most devastatingly, Marcus had been using his knowledge of our financial situation and our investor relationships to position himself for a hostile takeover of Biogenesis. He'd been spreading rumors about my competence and reliability to our investors, suggesting that I was becoming too focused on theoretical research and not practical enough to bring treatments to market successfully. The evidence I uncovered revealed that Marcus had stolen over 12 years of my research data, including unpublished discoveries that could be worth billions of dollars in pharmaceutical development. He was planning to use that stolen research to launch his own company while destroying biogenesis and claiming credit for innovations that I had spent my entire career developing. But Marcus had made a critical error in his planning. He had underestimated my understanding of the science behind our treatments, my ability to trace the origins of research data, and my determination to protect the patients who depended on our treatments from his exploitation. I spent the next 10 weeks conducting the most comprehensive investigation of my career, using every resource at my disposal to document Marcus's theft and build a case that would not only expose his crimes but also protect our patients and preserve the scientific integrity of our research. I hired forensic computer experts to trace Marcus's access to our research databases and document his unauthorized copying of our proprietary data. I worked with intellectual property attorneys to analyze our patent applications and identify where Marcus had been sabotaging our submissions. I coordinated with regulatory authorities to ensure that when I revealed Marcus's crimes, the appropriate legal mechanisms would be in place to protect our research and our patients. More importantly, I began building a comprehensive strategy that would not only expose Marcus's theft, but also ensure that he faced the maximum possible consequences for his betrayal of our scientific partnership and his exploitation of patients who needed our treatments. I discovered that Marcus had been incredibly reckless in his theft, leaving digital trails and communication records that could be easily documented and used against him. He'd been using company computers to copy research data, storing stolen information on cloud accounts that could be traced, and even communicating with his co-conspirators using email accounts that left comprehensive records of his plans. But Marcus had made an even more fundamental error. He had stolen my research data without understanding the underlying science well enough to use it effectively. The treatments he was planning to develop based on my stolen research contained critical flaws that would make them ineffective or even dangerous for patients. I realized that I could use Marcus's scientific ignorance against him by allowing him to proceed with his plans while I prepared evidence that would expose not only his theft but also his incompetence and his willingness to endanger patients for personal profit. The confrontation came during our annual scientific conference, where Marcus was planning to announce his departure from biogenesis and reveal his new pharmaceutical company to the biotech community. Marcus had spent months preparing for this conference, coordinating with potential investors and positioning himself as the visionary scientist who could lead the next generation of gene therapy development. He was expecting to use the conference as his platform for claiming credit for our research achievements and attracting the funding and partnerships he needed for his new company. Instead, I had prepared my own presentation that would turn his moment of triumph into the most devastating exposure of his career. The conference began exactly as Marcus had planned. Our auditorium was filled with the most prominent researchers, investors, and pharmaceutical executives in the biotech industry. Marcus delivered his opening remarks with his usual confidence and charisma, thanking the scientific community for their support and hinting at exciting new developments in gene therapy research. Then I stood up to deliver what everyone expected would be a routine presentation about our latest research findings and future development plans. Instead, I began by explaining that I'd recently discovered some information about intellectual property theft in our industry that I thought the scientific community should know about, especially since it directly affected the integrity of biomedical research and patient safety. I then began presenting evidence of Marcus's theft of our research data, including detailed computer forensics showing how he'd been copying our proprietary information and sharing it with outside parties. I explained how he'd been sabotaging our patent applications and regulatory submissions to delay our ability to bring treatments to market. The auditorium fell completely silent as the evidence of Marcus's betrayal was presented to the most prominent members of the biotech community. Marcus went white as a sheet and looked like he was going to be sick, while our colleagues stared in shock and disbelief at the man they trusted with some of the most important medical research of their careers. But I wasn't finished with my presentation. I had also prepared comprehensive documentation of the scientific flaws in the treatments Marcus was planning to develop using my stolen research. I presented detailed analysis showing how his lack of understanding of the underlying molecular biology would result in treatments that were not only ineffective but potentially dangerous for patients. More importantly, I revealed that I'd already contacted federal authorities and regulatory agencies about Marcus's crimes, and that a full investigation was already underway. I explained that I'd been working with intellectual property experts to trace the stolen research and that we were confident we could recover all of the data Marcus had stolen and prevent him from using it to harm patients. The aftermath was swift and devastating for Marcus, but incredibly protective for our patients and our research. Federal authorities arrested Marcus at the conference, charging him with intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to defraud investors. The evidence I'd gathered was so comprehensive that he had no choice but to plead guilty to avoid an even longer prison sentence. Marcus's reputation in the scientific community was completely destroyed. His planned pharmaceutical company collapsed before it even launched, and several of his co-conspirators were also arrested and charged with related crimes. The biotech press covered the story extensively, portraying Marcus as one of the most brazen scientific criminals in recent pharmaceutical history. Our investors, rather than losing confidence in biogenesis as Marcus had expected, actually increased their support for our company. They were impressed by my diligence in uncovering the theft and my commitment to protecting our research integrity, even when it meant exposing my own business partners' crimes. But the most satisfying aspect of my response was the impact on Marcus's ability to ever work in pharmaceutical research again. Because I documented his theft so thoroughly and had demonstrated his fundamental lack of understanding of the science he'd stolen, Marcus was banned from working in pharmaceutical research for life. He was also required to pay significant financial penalties that ensured he would never be able to profit from his crimes. More importantly, the civil lawsuits filed by Biogenesis and by our investors ensured that Marcus would face personal bankruptcy and would never be able to rebuild his career or his reputation in the scientific community. 14 months later, I'm leading Biogenesis to even greater scientific achievements than we'd accomplished before Marcus's betrayal. The experience of uncovering and exposing Marcus's theft taught me valuable lessons about trust, intellectual property protection, and the importance of maintaining scientific integrity even in the most competitive research environments. I've implemented new security measures and data protection protocols that ensure no one person can access or copy our proprietary research without proper authorization and oversight. More importantly, the incident actually strengthened our company's reputation in the biotech community. Our colleagues and our competitors recognized that I'd been willing to sacrifice my own business partnership to protect the integrity of scientific research and patient safety, and that level of commitment attracted new collaborators and new opportunities. I've also used the experience to become an advocate for stronger intellectual property protections and research security in the pharmaceutical industry. I've testified before Congress about the need for better safeguards against scientific theft and corporate espionage, and I've worked with industry organizations to develop best practices for protecting proprietary research data. The most satisfying aspect of this experience wasn't the legal victories or the financial recovery. It was the demonstration that scientific integrity and patient welfare must always come first, even when it means making difficult decisions about business partnerships and personal relationships. My investigation into Marcus's crimes wasn't just about protecting our company's intellectual property. It was about protecting the patients who depended on our treatments and ensuring that scientific research maintains the highest standards of honesty and integrity. Marcus thought he could exploit our partnership and our shared commitment to scientific advancement to steal my life's work while expecting me to deal with the consequences of his betrayal. But he had fundamentally misunderstood what it means to be a scientist and what it means to have a responsibility to advance human knowledge for the benefit of all patients. The research partner he thought he was deceiving turned out to be someone who understood not only the science behind our treatments but also the legal and ethical frameworks that protect intellectual property and patient safety. He discovered that stealing scientific research requires not only access to data but also the knowledge and competence to use that data responsibly. In the end, Marcus learned that you can steal research data temporarily, but you can't steal the scientific understanding and ethical commitment that makes that research valuable. The partnership he destroyed was built on genuine scientific innovation and patient advocacy, and when he chose to prioritize his personal profit over scientific integrity, he lost everything that had made his career successful and respected. The investigation had revealed not only Marcus's theft but also his fundamental incompetence as a scientist. Sometimes the most devastating weapon in the corporate world isn't hostile takeovers or financial manipulation. It's simply demonstrating that competence and integrity matter more than access to information. The stolen research Marcus thought he could use to build his pharmaceutical empire became the evidence I used to destroy his career and protect the patients who depended on our treatments. The most important victory wasn't personal revenge. It was ensuring that scientific research maintains its integrity and that patients receive treatments developed through honest, competent research rather than stolen data and corporate greed. The patent thief had learned that in science, as in life, there are no shortcuts to genuine achievement. Innovation requires not only access to information but also the knowledge, integrity, and commitment to use that information responsibly for the benefit of humanity.